Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real
Hey,
pleasure to be
Sarah.
speaking
Hello.
today. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for coming.
Can you give us a brief intro to the Institute? What can people expect going in to watch this series?
This is a fun series in the sense of it goes down many different roads. I think people will enjoy it. Not the torturing so much, but as in, you root for these characters a lot. Yeah, from the outset. I think it's hard as well because it's the primary focus is the torturing of kids, which isn't a nice subject matter, is it? But, you're rooting for them and you want them to escape and do well, with the help of obviously. But I think I hope people are going to enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when I was reading the book, I think it has a real slow burn kind of tension to it, a really kind of like a quiet simmering quality to it, where you're really like willing for these particularly I think these two characters with the kind of like moral compass to like overcome the odds and overcome the institutions that hang over them and the injustices that they are kind of confronted with, and you really kind of want them to do it together as well somehow, but you kind of have to be a little bit patient because it's a very delayed gratification kind of tense thrill ride really, and I'm a big sort of big fan of stuff like that. So when I was reading this book, I was, you kind of can't quite read fast enough to keep up with your appetite for what you want to happen, and to see if what you're projecting will happen is how it's going to play out.
Never fail to be astounded just how prolific Stephen King is, because there never seems to be any shortage of new material for adaptations, for film, for series. Have you always been a big fan of his work? And what do you think it is that makes him such a master of this genre, not only in the literary form, but also for adaptations for the small and big screen?
It's a lot about the character, the journey that the characters go on. Like, I'd say, for example, one of my favourite projects of his is Misery. Yeah, it's just that thing, it's so uncomfortable. I think he's very good at, even through the page, just like making you want to just do that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, he stares you right in the face with just horrible things, and it's like, well, you're not going anywhere. You're gonna watch this, or you're gonna read this. And it can be really hard, I think.
And it's the layers that he imbues everything with, in terms of there's always stakes, and there's always like a real like tension that it like that kind of like pushes you through a story, but they're also very often driven by hope. I mean, I think you look at something like Shawshank Redemption, it's like very on the surface in terms of how the story ends and what he says the story has been about. It's about hope, and I think that every time you're confronted with an evil or like the powers that be or an institute, I think Stephen King does question those kinds of themes a lot, in terms of just because this is a system that has been set in place, is it necessarily the right system, and what is their motivations, and are they kind of moral? I think he must be a man with a kind of a real true north moral compass, because he likes to confront those things, and particularly I think also like the sort of abuse of the vulnerable, whether that's in this case literally children, but I mean these are themes that come up in his work over and over again, and I think it's that like catharsis of like what you fear might happen and what you hope will happen, because he writes real people with flaws and skills. There might be characters who are like geniuses, but they also like really suffered something, and there might be people who are kind of who are kind of like carrying baggage with them, but they have like a fierce sense of justice. So I think a lot they're very he writes about human beings in extraordinary situations.
Again, coming to your individual characters, I guess that's very much the case with Luke. He's at his core just this very sort of kind-hearted boy, but put in this very terrifying situation. So even though he has this, one of these people that has these unique abilities, there's something very relatable about that. So how did you see him, and how did you approach playing him?
Well, I think that, he has a very, he puts up walls, because of his level of intelligence, but that can only go so far, I think, with kids. There's a moment in the early days where he just breaks down after one of the, because it's the smarts and that can only take you so far, but if you are literally just a little boy, you're gonna break at some point. And especially with everything that's happening to him, he is just that little terrified child because he's in a new world, but he's putting on this not completely a front, but because he is very confident in his abilities and his ability to read people and all of that kind of thing. But I certainly in my head had I'm not going to try and make this kid cool, or because he's a boy, you know, he's 14 in the show, so it's like, well, and even younger in the book, he's 11, and it's like, no, these are young kids, so that's all it is, and they just happen to have these abilities. But definitely in my head, it was going into it, I'm not gonna, you know, he's gonna be a kid. He's gonna be a kid.
And was it a challenge also when there's so much on the page in terms of the inner lives or the inner voice of a character, when obviously you're playing it in a TV show? Was that something you had to kind of grapple with, or is it all there in the script for you, really?
Ben Cavell he was so good the whole time of just, if I ever had a question about the script, he was so good at listening to it, because I do think, I've definitely met people at, you know, say school or whatever, who I'll go to them and say, are you sure about this? Or I just had a question about this, and they just went, what? But no, he was very, very lovely. It's just about if I had a question or a note, how I could maybe improve what I was saying. And he was always, because, you know, we're all doing the same job. We're all trying to make this show as good as it can be, and it's,
Also, the character might be like a genius in this extraordinary situation, but he's also playing a teenager, and nobody knows that better than Joe does. So to see him kind of imbue the character with all those kind of qualities, and I think a lot of the stories that we hold closest are about that age group, you know, for a reason, because we all remember growing up and that period between boyhood and manhood, or girlhood and womanhood, and kind of negotiating those things. And so there's like all these emotions kind of like flying around because of the extraordinary situation, and because it's difficult to live with being like a genius or whatever, but also just being a teenager and having, you know, everything that you know and love like ripped away from you. And that can also happen like later in life, which is kind of how the characters are mirrored a little bit. Like everything that Tim knows and loves is no longer what is comforting him and surrounding him too. So, you know, I think they're kind of kindred in that way.
And what was your approach to playing Tim? Because I guess he's kind of maybe sort of this archetype we've seen before of this cop, you know, who's sort of haunted and, you know, weighed down by his past, but looking for that opportunity to sort of have something to believe in again, to bring him alive again.
I hadn't even really thought of it about how you just phrased it, about looking for something, because I think he doesn't know that about him. So he doesn't know that he's looking for something to kind of reignite the pilot light of his kind of like passion and curiosity or anything. I think he's looking for some solitude and some peace and a reset. He's looking for a reset, I think, at the beginning, and I was just like very aware of trying to play that and trying to make sure I brought all the baggage that pre-exists the story of the book with him, and that heaviness. But then I thought what was interesting about him that felt different from a lot of those like small town cop kind of shows or the detective shows that we used to seeing is that they helped me chart this as I voiced it to the writers, that he has a real awareness that he has a propensity and a kind of trigger to kind of involve himself when he feels that there is injustice. And he knows that it's not necessarily a good thing, and it can overwhelm him sometimes, that kind of push in the back towards like involving himself, which is like not necessarily a good quality, but he knows he's a good man. And so I think like wrestling with that is part of what he starts to negotiate, which I thought was what made him kind of a little bit interesting.
What were some of your favourite moments on set? I know you're shooting in Nova Scotia. Like you said, you had this great team directing you, and also working with the rest of the cast. I mean, if it's very intense to watch, does that mean it's also very intense on set in this kind of sinister,
not necessarily.
I
mean, you have to speak for all the sort of like torture and all that stuff that I've had to deal with in like other shows and movies so far, and then this one, you know, I was reading it, and he becomes a night knocker, which is this kind of not quite cop, not quite security guard, kind of, slightly made up job, but that he's kind of like a warden of the town at night time. And I thought that's going to be a lot of night shoots, but I quite like night shoots. They feel quite magical. I've always liked being in spaces. One of the things about acting, even in the daytime, you get to go to these spaces which are normally people and life, and they're kind of empty. And I always loved that. Even when I was a kid, like if I found myself like late at school after doing like something, music or sport or something, and like everyone was gone, and you find yourself in a room which normally has hundreds of people, but it's empty. And I've always loved that. And with acting, I've got to shoot in the British Museum when there's nobody there, or you find some idyllic place in a forest which is you would never go to otherwise. And I've always loved that about. And then this was no different. Kind of be shooting at 4 o'clock in the morning, kind of in these abandoned streets of somewhere, and you think, I would never be here otherwise. I think that's kind of magical.
Yeah.
Finally, what does it mean to you to have the show here at the inaugural South by Southwest London, and what you're hoping people feel as they come out from watching it?
I only hope people enjoy it. I think that I know we've put in a lot of work, and this has been Jack Bender's baby for a very long time. So I think as well for him, I hope this does. It makes him think, we've done something good, and I think we have done something good. I just hope people can enjoy it, watch it, and
I've been to the sort of South by Southwest Film Festival before, and so to kind of, especially with the two of us playing Americans but being Londoners, to kind of come back and see it together for the first time here feels really special, and to have that kind of South by Southwest kind of like, there's been such brilliant stuff that's come out of that festival. So to be something kind of new and fresh as well, to be the first one is always kind of really exciting. But also, hoping that Stephen King and fans of Stephen King are going to like kind of be compelled by it and drawn to it as well, because that's such a rich canon. So to kind of like contribute our offering to that world, and offer up these characters that we've kind of lived with and nurtured into that world is I'm excited to see how people react to it, because you always spend all this quiet time together and alone, kind of creating these people and these stories and their backgrounds, and then it's edited and put out into the world. And this is the exciting time where we get to see what that process did to it.
Yeah.
And on the big screen as well. You don't always get a TV show on the big screen,
exactly.
So that's going to be amazing. Well, thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you very much.
Huge congrats on the show.
Thanks.
Can't wait for the premiere tomorrow as well.
you.
Thanks so much.